And welcome back for Chapter 5. Paul woke suddenly in the pre-dawn darkness. He'd always been an early riser, and by 5 was usually wading in from the deep, fathomless waters of dream to the shallows that broke on the shores of morning. Now he came awake with a start and lay still on his back, wondering what had awoken him. He listened and heard nothing out of the ordinary, only the smotheringly heavy quiet of the early morning in a rural town. He had heard Karen breathing from the cocoon of blankets beside him, heard the slow mechanical turn of gears as the backlit numerals on the old bedside clock tumbled one moment forward in time. His heart was skipping along rapidly, an adrenalized flutter, his senses becoming oversensitized to the expectant silence. He listened, motionless, and was finally rewarded. There, a sound, tiny and warbling, from within the bedroom itself. He froze and heard it again, coming from Karen, from within Karen, from the baby. He knew now that he must be dreaming. He rolled onto his side, facing Karen, studying the outline of her face in the dark. He put his face close to hers and smelled each sour exhalation. He shimmied lower in the bed, in the blood-warm dark beneath the down comforter, to the place where Karen's belly swelled beneath her nightshirt. As gently as he could, he brought his ear to her stomach. He heard the liquid sounds of her insides, the muffled thump of her heartbeat, or maybe it was his own heartbeat smothered in his ear, and beneath them the distant creaking sounds that lived in the mattress. And then he heard it again, that warbling coo. It was a faraway sound, a growl, distinct from the peristalsis of her digestion, and much a feeling sensed on the taut surface of the skin, a tremor, as it was a sound. Certain that he was dreaming, he spoke a single clumsy greeting. "Hello?" Instantly the warbling stopped, as if the child within Karen had heard him and stopped its feral cooing, and was now listening to him. Overhead, the pitched ceiling of the third-floor bedroom creaked as something heavy shifted. Paul looked up, tracking the scrabble of claws across the ceiling. The scrabbling ceased, and he heard a thud, the house shuddering slightly, as it did in winter when the old boiler kicked in. He looked at the clock, 5:35. He swung his legs free of the comforter and stood in his socks, stretching. Outside the blowing curtains of the bedroom windows, he saw the first light, a blush of morning. He went downstairs to make coffee, fetch the paper, and have a breakfast cigarette. In another hour he'd swing by the YMCA to pick up the hitchhiker he'd hired as cheap temporary labor. He paid $7.50 an hour, all under the table, for cleaning up work sites, hauling lumber scraps to the dumpster, light demolition, etc. Downstairs, Paul stood barefoot on the cold kitchen linoleum, listening to the coffee maker burbling away cheerfully, and found his thoughts drifting to the tension that had thickened the air of late between him and Karen. Was this simply first-time motherhood jitters, or something more serious, tremors from a deeper fault line in their relationship? When he was feeling surly and irritable, he allowed the thought to surface that she was ashamed of him, ashamed of the fact that he'd never gone to college and made his living as a contractor. When he was in this mood, he took her suggestions, a book he should read, a movie he might like, as condescending recommendations for self-improvement, as if she wanted to play Henry Higgins to his Eliza Doolittle. Once she'd recommended A Farewell to Arms to him, thinking he would respond to the stark sentences in romantic fatalism. But when he preferred Light in August, she seemed surprised, as if she'd thought Faulkner beyond him. He poured himself a mug of coffee and slurped a scalding mouthful. He opened the front door and walked out onto the front porch. The smooth boards underfoot were damp with dew. The kid who delivered Karen's Wendell Gazette had horrendous aim, and Paul was just fishing the newspaper out of the forsythia bushes when he suddenly froze mid-stretch. Froze as his eye traveled out to Lower Avenue. and saw his pickup truck overturned by the curb, resting on its crushed cab. As was every other car along the Lore, overturned in their driveways. It was October 20th. Wither is watching the magistrate, Jonah Cook, as he smokes a clay pipe, but the man is unaware of her presence. It is as if she is a ghost in his house. In a very real sense, she is an apparition. Thunder rumbles as dark clouds roll across the face of the moon, casting the keeping room in deeper darkness. The candlelight from a single wall sconce is unable to push back the redoubled gloom. Heavy rain begins to sheet outside. In a moment he hears the light rapping on the door. Wither has been expecting the caller, while Cook seems mildly surprised. He places his pipe carefully on a metal charger, then rises and opens the door. A figure in a red hooded riding cloak stands before him. "So, you have come, after all?" Hands reach up to reveal the long red hair and fair face of Rebecca Cole. Rain pelts her mercilessly as she stands patiently before them. "If you will stand for me at trial, I am agreeable to your proposition." "The only sensible course," he says. "Come in out of the rain." He motions her inside, and she keeps her back to him as she walks to the middle of his keeping room. "My fits have left me, but my accusers remain. They say I am cured for pleasing the devil and continue to practice witchcraft. Only you, magistrate, can put an end to these hateful rumors, and save me from the hangman's noose." She is shivering. "I fear I have caught a chill." She wraps her arms tightly around her cloak. He lights a stick of pitch pine at the wall sconce and then takes it to the fireplace where he gets a steady fire going. Lightning flashes, but with her back turned to him, he cannot see the wild look in Rebecca's eyes. There is something of the feral animal in that look. "Allow me to take your cloak. Warm yourself by the fire." She clutches the cloak tightly. "Then you will search me for the devil's mark, the witch's teat, so you will know I am not his willing servant." "So I shall." The lecherous gleam waxes in his face. "A most thorough examination, Rebecca. Anything less, and the devil's mark might go unnoticed in my haste. If you are free of his mark, I will use my influence with the other magistrates." "I take you at your word, Magistrate Cook." Rebecca opens her cloak and is satisfied with his startled look. She wears nothing but a nighttime shift underneath the red cloak. "I would not falter in haste. Please forgive my inappropriate dress." "Forgiven," he says, his glaze lingering overly long on the slender lines of her body. "Ah, but let me hang your cloak to dry." As he walks to a pegboard on the wall beside the door, Rebecca smiles and runs her hands down the sides of her body, taking a deep breath. She whispers, "A fish firmly set on my hook." He turns back to her, his harsh face set in shadows like lumps in his countenance. A thoroughly unappealing face, she thinks, even more so with that hideous smile. The devil may place the mark anywhere on the body of his servant, a nipple of inhuman, unfeeling flesh, so that he or his familiar may come to suck the blood of the witch, and a measure of her soul along with it. It is a cold bit of flesh, unfeeling to the prick of the needle, or to the stroke of a hand. His hands lift hers, and he makes a show of searching between her fingers, her palms, wrists, the undersides of her arms. His fingers are dry and scaly as they sweep over her shoulders and back down to her elbows. He lifts her long red hair and looks behind her ears, down the nape of her neck. Obviously, if you wear his mark, the old boy has hidden it well. "Search where you will to convince yourself I am free of it." She is still playing her part, the frightened accused, allowing him to think he is in control of the situation. They both know his search is a pretense, nor is she foolish enough to believe that Jonah Cook will be true to his word. He will never stand by her if she is accused and goes to trial. His hollow promise is but part of his lecherous game. "Your feet are splattered with mud," he comments. She has come in bare feet. delighting in the sensuous feel of the earth beneath her feet on this night. Yet I doubt the old boy would stoop himself to suckle at your feet. Jonah likely does not wish to get his hands dirty in the details of a thorough search. He kneels behind her, content to check her calves and the back of her knees. I have checked all that I can see. You must remove your shift. Of course, she says, smiling wickedly. She pulls the loops free under her neck, and the shift becomes loose enough for her to pull over her head. She tosses it aside and stands naked before him, no longer the demure girl. He gasps at her brazenness, but he is not about to object to her unseemly display. In a moment he begins fondling her buttocks, the pretense of conducting a search for the devil's mark immediately forgotten. She smirks in satisfaction. He clears his throat. I see nothing here that offends. His hands stroke up and down the back of her thighs, his fingers trembling. Good. He comes around before her. His lecherous stare is captivated by her full breasts, his hands tentatively reaching out toward her. Briefly his eyes meet hers, and they are wide with excitement. He gulps and croaks out something she cannot understand, yet she knows what he wants. Be assured, she says, taking his hand and pressing it to her breast. She guides his hand across her nipples, feels them rise with her excitement, an excitement that has more to do with her power over him. I see a mark, he says softly, here and here. Merely freckles, she says, surely not cold. No, never cold. His hands wander again to her breasts, her nipples, sliding down her abdomen and even venturing lower. I must have you, understand? She nods, and her hungry smile wide as she unfastens the loops on her jerkin, on his jerkin. You will find no part of me cold to your touch, she promises. She has the clothes off his scrawny, knobby-kneed body, even as his pawing continues unabated. Do what you must, she says. Take me to your bed. His mouth falls to her right breast, his tongue to her nipple. Odd that he, who searched for the witch's teat on her, now suckles of her himself. Ha! Rebecca shouts as a peal of thunder shakes the house. Lightning flashes brightly enough to fill the room and reveal Elizabeth Wither, or rather her apparition, standing in the corner of the keeping room. She nods to Rebecca, whose eyes are locked with her spectral gaze in that split instant. The taste of you, Jonah Cook says, seems strange to me. Ointments and potions on my body, she says, to excite you all the more. Rebecca steers him toward the bed, keeping his eyes away from the corner that hides Wither's specter. Simple, since he cannot avert his eyes from her nakedness even for a moment. The fire inside him grows higher, and she has stoked it well. She pushes him back on the bed and climbs astride him. You are a wanton, he gasps, his breath ragged. Surely a succubus. But he is beyond the point of rational thought. As she mounts him, she chuckles. You have no idea. At the critical moment, he grips her waist and attempts to hold her firm, but she rides through his pitiful climax, throws her back her head, and laughs wildly. He cannot control her ever again. His moan becomes a strangled cry. Thunder shakes the house. His hands fall away from her sides, limp as the rest of him has surely become. The sinews in his neck relax, but his wide, frightened eyes continue to stare at the ceiling, already collecting dust. So much better than you deserved, wouldn't you say? You disgusting old goat, she says, leaving his bed with a satisfied chuckle. Attend the fire, Wither's spectre whispers. Rebecca nods. She has already killed him, and now she will destroy his corpse. She lights a stick of pitch pine in the fireplace and walks towards the bed. Wendy sat up in bed, covered with the damp, clingy sweat peculiar to bad dreams. The light of the waning moon shone down on her bed, where the sheets were rumpled, and she snapped on a bedside lamp and looked down at her bed. The sheets were torn, long gashes as if an animal had smelled raw meat beneath them. She held them up to examine the parallel, ragged tears and discovered the extent of the damage beneath. Furrows had been gouged through the fabric of the mattress, the stuffing exposed in long tufts. For a moment she could only stare. When she had fallen asleep, everything had been normal, except that she had taken an infusion made from the rootstock of valerian. The cup was still on her night table, sediment at the bottom. She wore her moonstone and amethyst in a linen pouch pendant. She had decided to use dream magic to combat the strange dreams, to free herself from the endless repetition of 17th century Main Street. But she had been successful only in moving to another dream, a predatory dream, a murder. Who were these women she kept dreaming about? Persecuted women or accused witches? The Wendell witches? Wendy had never given much credence to Wendell's witch persecution era. She chalked up that time in history to hysteria. Besides, white magic wasn't what those times or witch trials had been about. People used to believe the world was flat, but that was no reason for her to take up the cause. White magic was a natural cooperation with and acknowledgement of Mother Earth. No pacts with the devil, no summoning or demons or dolls stuck with pins. Like it or not, she must be identifying with them, imagining their lives as persecuted outcasts. But, in her mind at least, they weren't just victims anymore. She sat by her window as the sun climbed over the trees, but it did not warm her. Her sheets were curled into a ball in her trash can. She had flipped the mattress over to hide the gashes, laid fresh linens over it, but had not slept upon them. She had outlasted the night, her secrets safely hidden. In that, at least, she and those distant women were alike. With the arrival of morning, she felt the need for normal routines and rituals. She climbed slowly out of the folding chair by the window, her muscles creaking, joints cracking with an achy stiffness. She might have slept on concrete by the way her body protested. With a weary sigh, she straddled her exercise bike, checked the odometer. 1,299.1. According to her wall atlas, she was about 15 miles east of Tallahassee, traveling west to Interstate 10. The Florida Panhandle seemed ungodly long, with her next big goal, New Orleans, still hundreds of miles away. Closing her eyes, she thought only of Tallahassee. She doubted she'd pull off 15 miles in her present condition, but reminded herself every long journey starts with a single turn of the wheel. She pedaled swiftly, the sound a ratchety whisper, a cleansing through exercise. Sweat out the impurities, work out the creak in the joints. Her fingers curled around the paddled handlebar grips as she gritted her teeth. Today she was not content with her normal leisurely pace. She pushed herself to the edge, seeking physical exhaustion, a relief to the tension that had been building in her since her ceremony in the woods. Her legs pumped, faster and faster, her feet straining against nylon pedal guards. She was vaguely aware of her forearms cramping, sweat streaming down her face and neck, soaking her gray Danfield t-shirt, the frantic hiss of the belt on the bicycle wheel. Why am I seeing these things in my dreams? These Puritan women and their crimes. I never cared that much about their criminal chapter in history, never obsessed about Wendell's minor bout of witchcraft hysteria, so why am I obsessing over it in my dreams? Knocking. Startled her. She shook her head, her thoughts numbed, waking from her trance, and stopped pedaling. Someone was knocking on her door, loudly. "Who is it?" she croaked, her throat painfully sore. Her tongue was swollen and dry. "Come in," she managed to say. Her father poked his head through the doorway, uncharacteristically angry. "Just how long are you planning on keeping up this racket?" "What?" "It's Saturday morning, Gwendolyn," he said. "Your mother and I would like to eat breakfast in peace and quiet. Give it a rest. Come down and eat something." He closed the door. She stepped down from the bike and whimpered in pain. Her thighs ached, and now that she was supporting her full weight, her legs trembled. She almost fell, but caught herself on the handlebars. "I feel like an invalid," she said, glancing at the odometer, "and I've only ridden—" She did the subtraction. 37 miles. She looked again at the black and white numbers of the odometer. 37 miles! She checked her alarm clock. In an hour! She had pedaled the bike almost 40 miles per hour, all in a trance. Jesus! She touched the metal tire and yelped as it burnt her fingers. Karen was napping in her book-cluttered office when the call came. Her office hours were Tuesdays and Thursdays in the afternoons, at which times students were welcome to seek help on term paper topics or discuss ways to resuscitate a struggling GPA. This early in the term, Karen typically had few visitors, and lately she'd taken advantage of the downtime to catnap, curled up in the comfortably upholstered armchair that had accompanied her through 3 colleges and half a dozen apartments. When the phone rang, she'd just been drifting off, lulled by the sound of a brisk October breeze stirring the loose windows in their panes. She came awake with a start at the sound of the old-fashioned telephone clanging in the cloistered silence of the cinder-block office. The English department needed to update its office equipment, but when it came to the distribution of infrastructure funds, Danfield gave preferential treatment to its big grant winners like biophysics and women's studies. She unfolded her legs from under her and crossed to her desk. Miss Glazier? The voice on the phone asked. This is Renee from Dr. Labajo's office. Dr. Labajo would like to schedule a time for you to come in and discuss the results from your amniocentesis. Karen felt a sudden knot of dread. What were the results? I'm not allowed to give out test results on the phone. Dr. Labajo would like to schedule. But they're my fucking results, Karen said. She heard the girl on the other end of the line suck in her breath in surprise. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. A cold silence. Ma'am, don't yell at me. I'm not allowed to give out test results. Especially when there's a problem. I'm sorry, you're right. She put out a hand to steady herself against the desk. The room felt suddenly too small. When? Can I come in, I mean? Dr. Labajo has cleared her schedule for you after 3:30 this afternoon. Cleared her schedule. Normally, Karen had to make appointments weeks in advance to get an audience with the obstetrician. Karen closed her eyes and said into the phone, I'll be there. This is quite a place you live in, Alex said as Wendy led him to the spacious kitchen of the president's mansion. He was lugging his astronomy text, a couple notebooks, and a scientific calculator. Wendy had already set her stuff out on the long table. 4 spare bedrooms upstairs, Wendy said. Huge foyer and entranceway, a den, and a library. Everything about this place is huge. Sometimes, when I'm alone, I yell and I can hear an echo. You yell when you're alone? He asked, smiling. Primal yelling, she said, grinning. Scream therapy. Never heard of it? No, he said, setting his books down, catty-corner to hers. You should try it sometime, she said. And of course, I only yodel when no one else is in the house. Now you're joking, he said, catching on. Yes, but not about the screaming part, she said. This house is like a big, empty cave half the time. A cave with central air and heating, he said. Well, a nicely appointed cave, she said. A few minutes later, they were each drinking Diet Coke from a glass and looking over their astronomy lab instructions in the kitchen. Alex flipped through several pages of his textbook and said, So we're supposed to find the exact time of sunrise and sunset for the day we graduate, which is the second Sunday in May, 3 years and 7 months from now. Can't we look this up in a farmer's almanac or something? We could, but remember Gorgas said to show our work. Well, I would just list the page number in the almanac. It won't be so bad, Wendy said. I think it only has to be accurate to within 1 minute. Oh, so it's no biggie then. She smiled. We can be wrong by 60 whole seconds and still pass with flying colors. Color me relieved, Alex said, shaking his head. Then he read the lab assignment again. I think we need to calculate the coordinates of the sun for the midnight before and the midnight after. No, she's given us those figures, right ascension and declination. That's the alphas and deltas. Oh, and we're to use Boston, level horizon at sea level, and she gave us the latitude and longitude. Well, that Professor Gorgas is just taking all the fun out of it. Wendy ignored the comment except for the quirk of a smile. We calculate the local sidereal times then. She flipped back a few pages in her text. Convert those to Greenwich sidereal times. Well, those conversions don't look so bad, comparatively speaking. Mind if I take those? Alex said. I'm a finance major, and we're not supposed to get much fancier than accelerated depreciation calculations. She laughed. Fine. I'll work on the local sidereal times. He watched as she flipped through the text. made quick notes in her notebook, plugged numbers into her scientific calculator, and jotted down her results. "I just love to watch you do that." "Oh, really?" "Nothing sexier than a woman whipping out sidereal calculations." She stuck out her tongue at him. "On second thought, that tongue thing definitely works for me." She laughed. "You know, we're never going to get through this at this rate." "You mean with me interrupting every 5 minutes?" He held up his hands. "I'll be quiet." Wendy nodded and went back to work, scribbling down some more figures. Alex kept his head down for the next 20 minutes and methodically worked through his calculations. Despite his pretense at mathematical incompetence, he seemed to have no trouble doing the conversions. Wendy would have a hard time coming up with a less romantic study date topic than a laborious series of calculations, but she guessed you had to play the hand you were dealt. "All done," Alex said, looking up and around for her. "At least I think they're all right. Want to check?" "You know what?" she said. "I think we need a break. Wait here a minute." She ran off before he could ask a question. Down the hallway, up the ridiculously grand staircase, down the long upstairs hall to a linen closet. She rummaged around, finally found the bundle she was looking for, and returned to the kitchen. "That's a blanket," Alex said. "You want to take a nap?" "Oh, silly," she said. "It's an astronomy class. Let's forget about all the numbers and foreign letters for a little while and look at some stars." "Now, why didn't I think of that?" "You were too busy trying to be charming," she said. He stepped beside her as they walked by the door to the pantry. "Was I?" "Occasionally." She flipped a switch by the back door. "What's that?" he asked. "Sprinkler system," she replied. She flipped a couple more switches. "Those?" he asked. "All the lights in back. It's much darker back here than in front. Moon's just a sliver, so we should be able to see some constellations." They walked out onto the spacious backyard where Wendy had already seen tents go up several times for various functions on the president's lawn. She wouldn't be surprised to wake up one day and find the Ringling Brothers circus tents being pitched. Tonight the lawn was uncluttered and relaxing. They walked far enough out from under the long second-story balcony to get a clear view of the sky, the black velvet darkness and the twinkling of stars, a wondrous canopy. She spread the blanket out with a snapping motion, reminiscent of a magician about to make a costumed assistant disappear. "Welcome to the Gwendolyn A. Ward Observatory," she said, indicating the blanket. "Please be seated. Our show is about to begin." When she returned home later in her Volvo, she saw with relief that Paul wasn't there yet and she had the house to herself. The overturned cars that had greeted them this morning, the most ambitious act thus far of a particularly creative band of vandals, had all been towed away, and the street and sidewalks and driveways along Lower Avenue were sprinkled with chips of safety glass sparkling in the late afternoon sun. Karen piloted the Volvo carefully into the garage, which had spared it from the vandals, and entered the house through the laundry room. She made herself a cup of tea and sat in the living room among the lengthening shadows. She turned the television on to the local news and lowered the volume to a whisper. Her eyes unfocused before the newscast, where a local reporter stood in a pasture describing the prior night's livestock mutilations in a neighboring town. The local news went to a commercial, and the screen filled with the image of a baby sitting inside an all-weather radial tire. Karen looked away. Some uncertain amount of time later, she heard the thump of a car door closing in the driveway. Paul entered in his work boots and flannel shirt. She listened to him, disappointed to have the silence she'd cultivated interrupted by this loud presence. The front door closed too brusquely, his humming, the jingle of keys, and pocket change. "Hey, I didn't see you sitting there," he said. "How was your day?" "Fine." "You should have seen it out there this morning. It took every tow truck in Essex County to clear the street. Did you see anything about it on the news?" "No." "I got a rental. It's a pretty sweet ride. I'm thinking about talking to Dick Hollins about leasing one just like it. You want to see it?" "Maybe later." He watched her as she stared into her tea, which sat untouched between her cold hands. Suddenly he reached across the kitchen table for her hand. At his touch, a tiny static electric spark leapt between them, and she startled. It was the first such shock of the season, and it reminded her that winter was coming. Karen, I want to talk to you about something, he began, giving her hand a squeeze until she lifted her eyes to his. Please, not now, but she didn't say the words. He showed her a gentle smile, and she tried to harden her heart against the look of open love and concern he gave her. I've been really stupid lately, he said. Please don't. Just really dumb, like a teenager, like those stupid fucking kids I hire for $7 an hour, thinking I can just stroll along and take life as it comes to me, make decisions about my life, about us, as if they're no different from decisions about what grade of lumber I need for a job or what kind of truck to buy. He frowned as he struggled to put the words together, as if what he rehearsed wasn't jibing with what was coming out of his mouth. She saw him back up mentally and come at it again from a different direction. I guess what I'm saying is I've taken a lot for granted, important things. You, our daughter. I've been sitting back and letting these wonderful things just happen to me. I realized that today how lucky I am and how little I'd done to deserve it. Now Karen spoke. Paul, don't talk like this. You've been perfect. No, I've been complacent. Look at us. I pretend because we're both almost 40, I can leapfrog right over marriage. We should just move in together. It's not about romance, just two grown-ups talking things through. He smiled again, guilty and repentant. But that's not what I want, to back up into love. He began rooting in his shirt pocket. He held the engagement ring out to her with nicotine-stained fingers, and she looked at it blankly as if it was an alien object. I'm asking, will you marry me? And will you forgive me for not asking when I should have? When she began crying, at first he took her reaction for tears of joy and grinned in relief. But then she looked up at him with such sadness in her reddened eyes that he felt something harden inside his chest, as if part of him had turned to clay. What? Karen, tell me. The baby, she said, and it became a wail. Oh, Paul, our baby. She began to sob. When she calmed enough to tell him, he sat and listened expressionlessly, the life draining by degrees from his face. She told him about the amniocentesis and about the mysterious and profound birth defects detected within her womb. She told him between bouts of sobbing of the insidious growth of their gestating child, a growth unchecked by nature, speeded up like time-lapse photography by some fecund gene that lay coiled within their tainted chromosomes. And as she reached the end of her confession, she concluded with the same prophecy Maria Laveau had given her. It will probably end in a spontaneous abortion sometime before the end of term. She looked at Paul and saw him sitting like a statue. His eyes were fixed on the engagement ring resting on the table between them. He looked up to her, and she saw emotion building behind his eyes, though he was a man and the tears wouldn't come easily, even now. He came to her, shuffling forward awkwardly from his kitchen chair, wanting to hold her. She made it difficult for him by not rising, and he was forced to kneel on the cold linoleum before her. She kept her hands folded across her stomach as he took her in his arms. She felt a stab of guilty anger as he began to sob too, angry that he felt some claim on this sadness. She wanted to be alone, didn't want to share her misery. I need to be alone, she said, recognizing even as she said it that it was the most unreasonable thing she could possibly request. He pulled away from her, stunned and hurt, and searched her face for some sign of regret. But she had accepted herself as a villain, accepted her selfishness in her grief, and she did not blink. Karen, my God, you can't be alone. Not now, he said. I'm tired, Paul. I need to be by myself. I need to think. But I don't understand. I'm sorry, she said flatly. He scowled, and she saw his own grief suddenly flare brighter. She's my daughter, too, he said fiercely, the first hot tears coming now, freed by his anger. I'm losing something, too. When she met this with more silence, he suddenly turned from her and swept the contents of the table across the kitchen floor, bills, a calculator, placemats, magazines. Somewhere in the debris that went flying was the engagement ring, antique, once his grandmother's. He stormed out then, slamming the front door hard enough that it shook the frame. She sat in the echoing aftermath of his rage and stared at her hands long into the night, while the house grew cold around her. Okay, Alex said, lying beside Wendy on the blanket in the backyard of the college president's mansion. I was never good at finding constellations, but there's no mistaking that one. It's the Big Dipper right above us. Am I right? Sorry, Wendy said. That's the Great Square of Pegasus. Come on, he said. That has to be the Big Dipper. See the handle coming right off from it? That's part of Andromeda, the chained lady, Wendy said, pointing straight up into the sky. Go 2 stars up the handle, then turn right. That little fuzzy blob is the Andromeda Galaxy. Not all that impressive for a galaxy, Alex commented. It's over 2 million light years away, Wendy said, with a wistful air. It's actually bigger than the Milky Way. So, if that's the Great Square of Andromeda, Alex said, where's the Big Dipper? It's too close to the northern horizon now for us to see, Wendy said. Out at sea, we might be able to see it. No thanks, Alex said. I'm kind of comfortable right here. Wendy smiled. Look over to the northwest from the Great Square. That's the Northern Cross. She lowered her arm and her hand brushed Alex's. She moved her arm away slightly, but he reached over and covered her hand with his. Tell me a fatal flaw, she said quickly. Excuse me, he said. Fatal flaw, she said. Something you don't want anybody to know. A closely guarded secret about a personal shortcoming. Well, that depends. On what? Is this to be used in a blackmail context? She laughed. Secrets under the stars are never told. Did you just make that up? He asked, sitting beside her. Yes, she readily admitted, but I promise not to tell. Because this is a big thing you're asking, he said. She sat up beside him. Do you have something dark in your past, a felony perhaps? Oh my God, Alex isn't your real name. You really are in the witness protection program. My true past as Vito Cortisone is exposed. He shook his head, laughing. A fatal flaw, huh? I am sworn to secrecy, she said. Your secret dies with me. Okay, he said, then cleared his throat. Here goes. I have webbed feet. What? A little webbing between the toes. She burst out laughing. Hey, it's not like I'm the man from Atlantis. Wendy wiped a tear from her eye. Have you tried out for the swim team? She was still laughing. No, he said. I don't swim. Wait a minute, she said. Isn't Minnesota the state of 1,000 lakes or something? How can you not know how to swim? They wouldn't let me wear my shoes in the wading pool, he said, causing her to burst into another fit of giggles. He smiled and shook his head. I thought the other kids would think I was different. And you think wearing shoes in a swimming pool would make you look normal? Now he was laughing too. I didn't think it through that far. Let me see your feet, she said, reaching for his shoelaces. He spun away from her, swinging his sneakers out of reach. In a moment, she had her arms around him. No peeking until you tell me your fatal flaw, he said. She gave him a peck on the cheek, then sat back on her heels. I guess that's only fair, she sighed deeply. Here goes. My fatal flaw is I'm a wallflower. A wallflower, he said, incredulous. That's your fatal flaw? Uh-huh. Musical arrhythmia, he said. I'd hardly call that a fatal flaw. That's because you've never seen me dance, she said. I look like somebody lit my socks on fire. He laughed then. I'll let you see my feet when you let me see your dance. Arr, she said. Stalemate. Okay, then you have to answer a personal question, she said. Am I missing a list of rules or something? My yard, my rules, she said, grinning. Just answer the question. He nodded. What's with the Hawaiian shirts? Mind over matter, he said. Come again? Brutal winters break your spirit, he said. I wear Hawaiian shirts to change my state of mind. It can be 10 below zip in January, but in my mind it's always balmy. She stared at him for a moment, impressed. And that keeps you warm? No, I freeze my ass off, he said. But I have to keep trying. It's all about self-improvement. She gave him a good-natured shove. Had you going, didn't I? Yes, she said. Mind over matter. I believe that shit. Hey, so do I, he said, but couldn't help laughing. Another personal question, she said. When do I get to ask the questions? In due time, she said, her tone becoming serious. Why did you come over here tonight? Because those sunrise calculations looked like a real pain in the ass. She jabbed him in the arm with her fist. I'm serious. Well, that is part of the reason, he said. The other part is, I like spending time with you. You don't think I'm odd? Well, you're different. Different? She was sitting straighter. Unique, he said. And that comes from a web-footed, fashion-impaired Minnesotan, so I wouldn't put too much weight in it one way or the other. I see, she said. I think you're, I don't know, exotic, he said. I find that intriguing. Exotic, she thought. I can work with exotic. So is it my turn? Go ahead, she said, leaning back on her palms. She smiled. It's about the tattoo, isn't it? You want to know where Bruno wanted to put that sun tattoo. He smiled, shook his head. No, I was wondering about the stuff you do. Stuff? You know, the white magic, the Wicca stuff, he said. What do you want to know about it? She asked. Go ahead, ask. My skin's gotten thick over the years. She clenched her fists, conscious of her black hardened nails. Well, I have a confession to make first. She sat forward, no longer leaning backward on her palms. That position seemed too vulnerable suddenly. You don't really have web feet? He smiled wryly. It's not that. He looked her in the eye for a moment, then looked away, over her shoulder. I'm not real proud of this. I don't know what got into me, actually. What? You wrote my phone number in the men's room? Tell me. Her smile was forced. I followed you, he said, that Friday night when you went into the woods. Were you alone? She asked, her jaw clenched so tightly it ached. She imagined Jack Carter, Jensen Hoyt, and Cindy Sellers traipsing through the woods to watch the naked girl commune with nature and laugh about it later. Of course I was alone, he said. What are you thinking? I don't know, she said coldly. What were you thinking? You were the one stalking me. I wasn't stalking you, he said. It's just that Frankie told me about your ceremony, and Frankie told you where I was? She said that if I was curious about the magic stuff, I should follow you and see for myself. If you were curious, you could have asked me. I can't believe her. Look, he said, I know it was way out of line. I really didn't know what to expect, so when you took off your robe, oh, Jesus, she thought, feeling her face start to crumble. She pressed her hand to her mouth and fought back tears. I can't believe you, she said. I trusted you. I thought you were different. I'd give anything to take back those few moments. He reached out for her arm, but she jerked away. Then a troubling thought crept up on her. Just how much had he seen? How much had he witnessed? So, I suppose you waited to get a good eyeful. Wendy, it's not like that, he said. I just wanted to see what the white magic stuff was all about. I didn't expect you to. The second I saw you take off the robe, I left. So, the sight of me in my birthday suit scared you off, she said with a bitter little laugh. No, Wendy, you are a really beautiful person, a beautiful woman. He shook his head, trying to sort out his own emotions. I felt like I was violating you, and good, because that's exactly what you did. At least he hadn't seen the rain spell and what came afterward. And even if I had left all my clothes on, you would have still been violating me, my privacy. His chin was all the way down on his chest, where only minutes ago he had been contemplating the stars. I know it, he said. I'm sorry. Wendy stood up abruptly. Get out. He looked up. What? Just get out, she said. I can't talk to you now. I can't look at you. He stood slowly, stunned. Please, Wendy, I'll do anything to make it up to you. Good, she said. Then get out. That's what you can do for me. She strode back toward the house. Alex stood on the blanket, hands widespread. Can't we talk about this? No, she shouted. He walked slowly toward the house, then stopped when she slammed the back door shut. Moments later, she opened the door and tossed out his textbook, notebooks, and calculator, which broke open on the patio. Wendy! She poked her head out the door. Sorry if I got you all hot and bothered out there in the woods. This should cool you off. He saw her reach for a wall switch, then dropped his head as the sprinkler heads popped up and soaked him. When he gathered his books, the scientific calculator was ruined. He could no longer see her through the back windows. Sopping head to toe, he trudged slowly around the house. Well, that could have gone better, he said. Wendy ran upstairs to the guest bathroom closest to her bedroom, shut the door, and sat down on the toilet seat lid. She put her face in her hands and cried silently. I'm such a freak, she said. Real sideshow material. All the boys come poke their sticks at my cage. She shuddered. Why did I ever think he might be different? Soft knock. Wendy, are you okay? Wendy sat up straight, wiped her nose. Fine, Mom. Has Alex gone? He had to leave, Wendy said. Track meeting in the morning. Sorry I missed him, her mother said. I'm sorry too, Mom, Wendy said. She sat for several long minutes, regaining her composure. She wiped her eyes and decided to check the damage in the mirror. Not too bad, she thought. Little blotchy. Can barely tell I had my dignity stomped on. She looked at her fingernails, and in the fluorescent lighting they appeared to have lightened to the dark purple shade that had preceded the black, almost as if they approve of me dumping Alex, she thought. What's that all about? She looked back in the mirror, and she screamed. For a moment her face had been replaced by a hideous visage, an oversized black leathery head with wisps of hair and incredibly long teeth. But it had been the yellow, wolf-like eyes that had scared her the most. They had been feral yet cunning, and they had looked right through her, right into the depths of her soul, and they had seemed to know her, to claim her. Those eyes seemed like the last thing she would ever see. Her mother didn't bother to knock this time. She just opened the door, pure maternal fear clouding her face. "Wendy, my God, what's wrong?" "Nothing, Mom," Wendy said. "It was nothing." "I know nothing when I hear it," her mother said, "and that was definitely something." "Just a spider," Wendy said. "A jumbo piston-legged beast in the sink." "A spider?" Wendy nodded. "I was washing my face, and there it was." Her mother looked skeptically at the spotless sink. I washed it down the drain." "You're sure you're okay, dear?" She hugged her mother. "I'm really okay, Mom. I just need some sleep. Long, dreamless sleep." Time for some more